Take it from the top, man.
All right. This is the long version.
Okay.
I've always been interested in aviation, ever since I was a little kid. And at that time, often I would build models, the solid balsa wood models, and even the ones that were made out of a balsa frame and with paper on the outside that had to be shellac, so forth.
Yes.
And that continued on even into college. And for some reason in college, I got interested in World War I aviation. And from reading about the airplanes and the men that flew them, I always wanted to fly behind a rotary engine. And rotary engine is an interesting type of engine because early on, the manufacturers of the engine didn't think it would be cooled enough if you just had the cylinders sitting out in the air.
Yes.
So what they did is they spun the cylinders with the propeller in an effort to cool the engine down, and which gives an interesting gyroscopic feeling. So I always wanted to fly behind one of those kind of engines. So this sort of went on into medical school. And interestingly enough, one of my classmates in medical school was a little older than I was, and he had been stationed with the Air Force in England for 4 years. And so we got to talking about old airplanes and what it would be like. And he said, well, look, if you're ever going to get an older airplane that's a biplane, get a Tiger Moth, because he had flown those in England. He said not only do they fly well, but they made a zillion of them, and there are all kinds of parts and so forth. Sometimes some of them not even used as of yet. So that would be an excellent plane to get if you're going to get a biplane with an open cockpit.
Yes.
So I went on and in about 1975 or 76 started taking flying lessons like I'd always wanted to, and in about 5 years managed to get my pilot's license. And then the next chapter started when I had to stay near a hospital one night, but not in the hospital. So I was out looking in a bookstore, and I picked up a magazine, a flying magazine, that I hadn't ever read before. And on the inside back cover, there was an advertisement for an auction in Florida where they were selling a museum. And in the museum, there were a number of World War I airplanes. So I sent away for the catalog, and indeed there were a number of them, of the World War I airplanes there. So then I thought, well, I really don't know anything about these real ones.
Yes.
So a lady down the street worked for a fellow that had an old airplane, and it turned out, interestingly enough, that Lars, who I've been friends with now for 30 years, had a Tiger Moth. And he didn't really know much about World War I airplanes when I called him up, but he had a couple of telephone numbers, and I called two of them, and one of them never answer. The other one didn't really know too much, but the third one, a fellow named Don Noonan, knew all about airplanes and engines, and he told me that the most important thing to do if you're going to get an airplane like this was to get one with a good engine. The rest of it you could deal with, but the engine was the most important.
Yes.
So off I went to Orlando, to the museum, and walked around for the day beforehand, and there were two airplanes with rotary engines. One was a Newport, which was really just a model airplane with an engine on it, and the other was a Thomas More Scout. And I knew about the Scouts because I had actually built a model of one when I had been a lot younger.
Yes.
So the people that were around, I asked one of them, who happened to be a fellow named Jim Appleby from San Diego Air Museum, and he looked on the inside of it and he thought, well, this looked like a pretty authentic airplane, and the engine actually did pull through.
Right.
So it looked like the right kind of airplane to get. So the next day at the auction, I actually bid on the airplane, and interestingly enough, the people from the San Diego Air Museum were bidding on it as well. But in the end, I prevailed and ended up with a Thomas More Scout. So then what to do with this? I was having a drink in the bar of the hotel where we were all staying, and there were the people from the San Diego Air Museum, and so I got to talking to them, and the reason that they had been interested in a Thomas More Scout was that the people that worked in the museum restoring airplanes had worked at a company in San Diego, which was the great-great-grandson of the company that built the Thomas More Scout. And this was the signature airplane of that company. And so they had wanted to reconstruct a Thomas More Scout. And the Air Museum really had other projects, especially a Zero that they obtained off the bottom, I believe it was off the bottom of a truck that they wanted to restore. And so if they had obtained the Thomas More Scout, then the people that were restoring the airplanes would be happy with their signature airplane and maybe get on with the Zero. And I didn't really know what to do with the plane, so the offer was, well, if you'd like to keep it in the museum until I got around to restoring it, that would be a great idea, which they agreed to. So the next day we packed the airplane into a big moving van, and it just barely fit. They had bought 2 other airplanes, and the Thomas More Scout just barely fit with the prop hub about 6 inches from the back door. So now that I had this airplane, the question was, how am I ever going to learn to fly it? Because you can't really go rent another Thomas More Scout and get instructions in it. And you can't even rent a biplane. And interestingly enough, Don Noonan, who I had talked to many times about the Thomas More Scout, had owned a Tiger Moth and had sold it to a fellow about 100 miles away who had flown it 100 hours the first year and then 50 hours the second year, and by the 4th or 5th year it had been sitting in his hangar and wanted to sell it. So Don and I went up and bought the Tiger Moth about, this was 30 years ago, and I still have it and spent many hours flying the Tiger Moth. But as far as the Thomas More Scout went, the years went on, and you get distracted and lose sight of one of your goals, I guess. And they were very good. They displayed it on the floor for a number of years, and then displayed it hanging from the ceiling for a number of years. But then they put it in storage, and just recently asked me what I really wanted to do with it. Did I want to restore it to either viewing display quality, or did I want to restore it to flying status, or did I want to donate it? And I thought about it for a while, and then Don Funk got a hold of me with his project of bringing a Thomas More Scout to Ithaca to fly it on its 100th anniversary, which intrigued me a little bit. And then it became pretty apparent that the museum actually wanted the donation of the airplane, probably so that they could either trade it or sell it for another airplane that they wanted. And my original thought when I had bought the airplane was to fly it. And when Don talked about rebuilding it and restoring it and then actually flying the airplane, this appealed to me a lot more. And finally we met over at Gillespie Field one time and had lunch, and I told him I'd be happy to donate it to Ithaca and the Bring Tommy Home group. So I had a chance when I was in Ithaca, visiting my son who lives there, to meet Don and the group that was interested in this project. And I had a chance to look at the work they had started on some wings for the Thomas More Scout and the facility in which they were working.
Tell us about that facility.
Interestingly enough, the facility was the original building in which the Scouts were built. The original workshop and a lot of the original machinery that was used to build the wooden structural parts, and then the assembly area where all the Scouts that had been sold to the government were assembled. A huge old concrete building up on the side of a hill. And after walking down multiple corridors and climbing many stairs, they brought me into a room where the wooden parts of the Scout were actually built, and by a lot of the machinery that was still there. And this is where they had started building wings for the Scout. And then a short distance away was the hall in which all the airplanes were assembled, which was very impressive. It was huge and impressive enough that after 100 years it was still there and looked very much like the picture they had of the Scouts being built in that hall. But I'm sure that the empty hall looked very much like the shop did 100 years ago when they were building the airplanes, because in that hallway there was only the airplanes
Yes.
and not very much else.